I had one of those days where everything seemed to go wrong. It started with my alarm not going off, causing me to miss my morning meeting at work. My boss, Mr. Carter, was already in a mood because our project was behind schedule, and I could feel his frustration directed at me like a laser beam. "Nikki, you need to pull your weight. This is your last chance," he snapped. The words hung heavy in the air, and I wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. By the time I returned home, the sun was setting, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple. I felt a knot of anxiety twist in my stomach. It was Friday, and I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt the weight of the week crushing down on me. I poured myself a glass of wine, no, not just a glass, but a generous pour. After 2 glasses, the chaos of the day began to fade, and my thoughts drifted to the little things that used to make me happy. I wandered outside to our backyard, where our private pool shimmered under the twilight sky. It was just me and the water, and for a moment, I felt free. As I stepped into the pool, the cool water enveloped me like a soothing balm. I floated on my back, staring up at the stars slowly beginning to twinkle. I lost myself in thoughts about my life, my marriage, and how I felt more like a ghost in my own home than a wife. My husband, Michael, was away on a business trip, and it had been days since we had a real conversation. I could hardly remember the last time he'd looked at me with anything more than mild interest. Just as I was starting to relax, I heard the sound of the front door opening. It was Dan, my father-in-law. He'd been away on a business trip, and I figured he'd be tired. I felt a pang of discomfort at the thought of him seeing me in my bikini, but it was too late to cover up. I was already in the water. "Hey, Nikki," he called, his voice echoing across the yard. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," I replied, forcing a smile, although my heart raced. It was strange to be in the pool with Dan, but he was harmless enough. We had always had a friendly relationship, and I often thought of him as more of an older brother than a father figure. He changed quickly and joined me in the pool, the water rippling as he dove in. As we swam, I tried to shake off the tension from the day. We splashed around like kids, and I couldn't help but laugh at how ridiculous we must have looked. The sound of our laughter mingled with the night air, and for a moment, it felt like everything would be okay. "So, how was the trip?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation away from my own problems. Dan wiped the water from his face and sighed. "Long and boring. Just meetings and more meetings. I missed out on so much family time. It's frustrating." "I get that. Michael's been working late every night. It feels like we're living separate lives," I confessed, a hint of vulnerability creeping into my voice. "Sometimes it's hard to balance everything," he replied, floating beside me. "But you have to find a way to make it work. Family is important." I nodded, feeling a strange kinship with him in that moment. Maybe we were both struggling in our own ways, yearning for connection that seemed just out of reach. I took another sip from my glass, feeling the warmth of the wine spread through me, loosening my inhibitions. "Do you ever feel like you want to escape?" I asked, almost jokingly. "Like, just jump in and swim away from all your problems?" Dan chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "Every day. But you know, sometimes it's good to face those problems head-on." There was something comforting about the way he said that. I found myself opening up more than I intended. I don't know how to talk to Michael anymore. It feels like we're drifting apart, and I'm scared of losing him. Dan shifted in the water, looking thoughtful. "Relationships take work, Nikki. Have you tried talking to him about how you feel?" I sighed deeply, the weight of my unspoken words hanging heavily between us. "I've tried. It's just so hard. He gets defensive, and I end up feeling like I'm the one to blame for everything." There was a pause, and for a moment, I was lost in my thoughts, reflecting on how everything seemed to unravel at the seams. The stars twinkled above us, casting a serene glow over the water, but my heart felt anything but peaceful. "Sometimes you just need to let it all out," Dan said, his tone gentle. "You're a strong woman, Nikki. Don't forget that." I smiled, grateful for his encouragement, but I also felt a wave of sadness wash over me. "Thanks, Dan. I just wish things could be different." Things can change if you want them to, he replied, his gaze steady on mine. In that moment, something shifted. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I could feel the tension building. I caught myself staring at him, caught in the vulnerability of our conversation. I'd never seen him like this before, open, caring, and somehow a little lost, just like me. Before I knew it, I was leaning in closer. I felt a rush of warmth, the wine clouding my judgment. The moment hung between us, and without thinking, I whispered, "What if we just let go?" It was a reckless thought, a wild urge fueled by wine and the weight of the world. I didn't even realize I was moving until my lips brushed against his. It was a fleeting moment, an impulsive action, but it felt electric. Dan stiffened for a split second, and I could see the surprise in his eyes. But then something changed. Instead of pulling away, he leaned in, deepening the kiss. The water around us swirled as if reflecting the chaos of our actions. I pulled back suddenly, breathless and panicked. "What did we just do?" I exclaimed, my heart racing. Dan looked just as shocked, but there was something else in his eyes, desire, confusion, and maybe even a hint of regret. "Nikki, I didn't mean for that to happen. I'm sorry." "No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It just happened." My voice trembled, and the weight of what we'd done settled heavily on my chest. We both floated in silence, the gravity of the moment hanging between us. I felt trapped between my own feelings and the knowledge of what was right. How could I have let this happen? This was my father-in-law, for crying out loud. "Maybe we should just forget this ever happened," he suggested, the tension in his voice evident. I nodded, still in shock. "Yeah, let's just act like it didn't happen." But the words felt empty. The moment was branded into my mind, a mark of my confusion and desperation. We swam quietly for a while, but the lightness had vanished. The laughter was gone, replaced by an awkward tension that wrapped around us like a heavy cloak. I could feel the distance between us growing, and every moment was filled with unspoken words and regret. Eventually, we both climbed out of the pool, the cool air biting against our skin. I wrapped a towel around my shoulders, still reeling from what had just transpired. Dan, too, looked lost in thought as he toweled off. "Maybe I should go inside," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, maybe that's for the best," he replied, his eyes downcast. I turned to walk back to the house, the silence between us stretching painfully. The comfortable warmth of the evening had turned into a cold void, and I felt more alone than ever. Inside, the house felt too big and too empty, like a reminder of all the things I had lost. I poured myself another glass of wine, hoping it would ease the weight in my chest. As I sipped, I thought about the kiss, the spark, and the sudden realization that everything was about to change. But how could I face Dan again? How could I face my husband, Michael, when I felt like I had just crossed a line I could never uncross? The night dragged on, and I tossed and turned in bed, haunted by the memory of that kiss. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, a drunken mishap, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. When morning came, I felt like a ghost, drifting through my daily routine. I avoided Dan at all costs, pretending nothing had happened. But I could sense the tension in the air, an unspoken barrier that had grown between us. Each time we crossed paths, I felt my heart race with anxiety. It wasn't long before Michael returned home from his trip, and the moment I saw him, a wave of relief washed over me. But that relief was short-lived. The reality of the previous night loomed large in my mind, and I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a precipice, waiting to fall. Michael walked in, his arms full of luggage, a bright smile on his face. "Hey, babe. I missed you," he exclaimed, pulling me into a warm embrace. I melted into his arms, grateful for the comfort he provided, but I felt a flicker of guilt for what I'd done. I didn't deserve this warmth after what had happened with Dan. "How was the trip?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Exhausting, but I got some good news," he said, his excitement palpable. "I think I'm finally getting that promotion." "That's amazing," I said, trying to sound genuinely enthusiastic. Inside, though, I felt a twinge of jealousy. He was moving up in his career while I felt stuck, struggling to communicate my feelings. As he settled in, we fell into our usual routine. We cooked dinner together, chatted about trivial things, and watched a movie on the couch. But beneath the surface, I felt a growing sense of unease. Every time I glanced at Dan, who had joined us for dinner, memories of the kiss flooded back, and I felt like I was betraying Michael in a way I couldn't articulate. After dinner, Michael suggested we take a walk around the neighborhood. I agreed, desperate to escape the tension at home. As we strolled, he talked excitedly about his plans for work, but my mind was miles away, replaying the events of the previous night. "Are you okay?" Michael asked suddenly, his brow furrowing with concern. "Yeah, just a little tired," I lied, forcing a smile. He reached for my hand, and I felt a flicker of warmth. Maybe I could push the memory of the kiss aside, focus on my marriage. But as we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. I didn't want to be the person who hid secrets, especially from the man I loved. The next few days were a blur of routine. I tried to act normal around Dan, but every time I saw him, a wave of shame washed over me. The awkwardness was suffocating, and I began to wonder if he felt the same way. I often caught him looking at me with a mixture of longing and regret, and it only added to my confusion. Then, one afternoon, as I was getting ready for dinner, I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. I opened it to find Dan standing there, his expression serious. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. I felt a jolt of anxiety. Sure," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. He entered the room, and I closed the door behind him, my heart pounding. "I don't want to make things awkward, but we need to address what happened," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I know." I trailed off, unsure of how to articulate the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "I didn't mean for it to happen. You're like family to me, and I care about you," he continued, his voice strained. "But there's something about that moment, it felt real, didn't it?" My heart raced. "It did, but we can't act like it didn't happen. I'm married, Dan. I love Michael." He nodded, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I know, but things are complicated. I've felt a distance growing between you and Michael. I didn't mean to cross a line, but that kiss, it meant something to me." Tears welled in my eyes, a mixture of frustration and confusion. "It meant something to me too. But I don't want to hurt Michael. He deserves better." "Then we need to figure this out," Dan said firmly. "I can't just pretend it didn't happen. We need to find a way to move forward." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. "What do you suggest?" "We can't just ignore it, but I don't want to ruin my marriage." Dan stepped closer, his voice softening. "Maybe we should take a step back, give each other space. Let's figure out how to be around each other without the tension. For Michael's sake." "Space sounds good," I agreed, but deep down, I felt a sense of dread. I didn't want to lose the connection I had with Dan, even if it was complicated. But I also didn't want to hurt Michael, who was so blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Let's try to act normal around each other." "I'll keep my distance," he said, his tone resolute. "Okay. Thank you," I whispered, feeling a sense of relief mixed with sadness. I knew that stepping back was the right decision, but it felt like losing a part of myself. Dan left the room, and I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. I felt lost and confused, caught between two worlds. My marriage felt fragile, and now I had to navigate the complexities of my relationship with Dan. The following weeks were tense but quiet. I made an effort to connect with Michael, but every time we tried to have a meaningful conversation, my mind would wander to Dan. The distance between us felt more significant than ever, and the guilt weighed heavily on my heart. Then, one night, I was lying in bed when Michael turned to me, his expression serious. "Nikki, is there something you're not telling me?" The question hung in the air, and I felt my heart drop. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. You've seemed distant lately. Is everything okay?" he pressed. I felt a surge of panic. "I'm fine. Just a little stressed with work," I lied, hoping he wouldn't press further. Okay, but if something's bothering you, you can talk to me, he said, his eyes searching mine. Really, Michael, I promise I'm okay. I forced a smile, but inside I felt like a fraud. That night, sleep eluded me as I wrestled with my thoughts. The shadows of doubt loomed larger, and I felt like I was losing grip on everything that mattered. I had chosen to keep my feelings to myself, and it was tearing me apart. Days turned into weeks, and I kept my distance from Dan, but the air between us crackled with unresolved tension. I missed our easy conversations and the way he understood me in a way that Michael didn't seem to anymore. One evening, while Michael was working late, I decided to pour myself a glass of wine and sit by the pool, hoping to clear my mind. The water glistened under the moonlight, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. But then I heard footsteps approaching, and my heart raced. It was Dan, a towel slung over his shoulder. Mind if I join you? He asked, his tone casual but his eyes serious. Sure, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. We sat in silence for a moment, the tension palpable as we both stared at the water. How are you holding up? He finally asked, breaking the silence. I don't know. It's been tough, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm trying to hold everything together. Have you talked to Michael about what you're feeling? He pressed gently. I shook my head. I can't. I don't want to hurt him. I just feel stuck. Dan leaned back, his expression thoughtful. You deserve to be happy, Nikki. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your feelings for anyone else. His words struck a chord deep within me. I felt a rush of emotion surge to the surface, and before I knew it, I was pouring my heart out. I feel so lost, Dan. I love Michael, but I feel like I'm losing myself in the process. The kiss, it made me realize I need more. Dan turned to me, his eyes softening. You deserve to be fulfilled, Nikki. But you have to decide what that means for you. You can't keep hiding your feelings. I felt tears prick at my eyes as I looked at him. I don't want to hurt anyone. But I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. Maybe it's time to take a leap of faith, he suggested, his voice low and steady. What do you mean? I asked, my heart racing. Maybe you need to talk to Michael. Be honest about how you feel. You can't keep living like this, he urged. The thought terrified me, but deep down, I knew he was right. I felt trapped in a cycle of avoidance, and it was eating away at me. I don't know if I can do that, I admitted, my voice trembling. Dan reached out, placing a hand on my shoulder. You can. And I'll be here for you, no matter what. His touch sent a shiver down my spine, and for a moment, I felt a connection that went beyond friendship. But just as quickly as it appeared, the reality of the situation came crashing back. I pulled away, shaking my head. No, we can't do this, I said, my voice firm. I have to figure this out on my own. Dan nodded, understanding, but his expression pained. I get it. Just know that I care about you, Nikki. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it, I replied, my heart heavy with unspoken words. As he walked away, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I knew I had to confront my feelings, but the thought of facing Michael filled me with dread. What if I hurt him? What if I lost everything I had built? The next few days passed in a haze, and the pressure mounted inside me. I could feel the weight of my silence, and I knew I had to make a decision. One evening, as Michael sat on the couch, I gathered my courage. Michael, can we talk? I asked, my voice shaky. Of course, he replied, his brow furrowing in concern. I took a deep breath, my heart racing as I prepared to unravel the tangled web of emotions inside me. I've been feeling really overwhelmed lately. I don't want to keep anything from you. He nodded, his expression serious. I'm listening. It's just. I've been feeling lost. I don't know how to express it, but it's like I'm drowning, I confessed, my voice trembling. He reached for my hand, and I felt a flicker of hope. You can talk to me about anything, Nikki. I want to help. I know, but it's complicated. I've been struggling to connect with you, and I don't know how to fix it. I want to be honest, but I'm scared of what it will mean for us, I said, my voice breaking. Whatever it is, we can work through it together, he replied, his grip tightening on my hand. I hesitated, my heart pounding. There's something I need to tell you about Dan. His expression shifted, confusion flooding his face. Dan? What do you mean? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my confession pressing down on me. Something happened between us. We kissed. Silence hung heavy in the air as Michael's expression shifted from confusion to shock. You kissed Dan? I know it was a mistake. I was feeling lost and confused, and I didn't mean for it to happen, I rushed to explain. But I can't pretend it didn't happen. Michael stood up abruptly, his face pale. You kissed my father? I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt you, Michael. I didn't know how to tell you, I pleaded, tears streaming down my cheeks. You should have thought about that before you kissed him, he shouted, his voice laced with hurt. I know. I messed up, but I didn't want to hurt you. I just felt trapped, and it happened in a moment of weakness. I cried, feeling the walls closing in around me. I can't believe this, he said, shaking his head. I thought we had something real, and now this? I still love you, Michael. But I need you to understand how lost I've felt, I begged, my heart breaking. Love isn't supposed to hurt like this, he replied, his voice cold. Please, just listen to me. I cried, desperate for him to understand. But the damage was done. Michael's hurt was palpable, and I could see the distance growing between us. I felt like I was losing him, and it terrified me. I need some space, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. As he walked away, I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. The weight of my actions crashed down on me, and I realized I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I had hurt the person I loved most, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Michael moved into the guest room, and the distance between us felt insurmountable. I could feel the silence stretching between us like a chasm, and I knew I had shattered our once happy marriage. I spent my days at work, drowning in my responsibilities, but every moment felt heavy with guilt. My colleagues noticed the change in me, and I forced myself to smile, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I felt like I was crumbling. Dan reached out to me after a few days, concerned about how I was holding up. Can we talk? He texted one evening, and I felt a mix of relief and dread at the prospect. I didn't know how to face him after everything that had happened. When we met at a local cafe, I felt a weight on my chest. I don't know what to say, I admitted as we sat across from each other. Just be honest with me, Nikki. How are you feeling? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I feel terrible. I ruined everything, I said, my voice trembling. Michael is hurting, and it's my fault. Dan reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. You didn't intend for any of this to happen. It was a mistake, but that doesn't mean you're a bad person. But I hurt someone I love, I replied, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. I don't know how to fix it. Sometimes fixing things means being honest about how you feel. Have you talked to Michael since, you know? Dan asked gently. I shook my head. He doesn't want to talk to me. I don't know if he ever will. We both know you have to try. You can't keep running away from this, Dan said, his voice firm but kind. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of his words. What if he doesn't want to forgive me? What if I've ruined everything? Then you'll have to face that. But you can't let fear dictate your choices, he replied, his grip tightening on my hand. I nodded, feeling a surge of determination mixed with fear. You're right. I have to face this. As the sun set that evening, I made my way home, my heart racing. I knew I had to confront Michael, but the thought filled me with dread. I entered the house, and the silence was deafening. Michael? I called, my voice echoing in the emptiness. He appeared from the kitchen, his expression guarded. What do you want, Nikki? I need to talk to you. Please, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. He nodded slowly, and I felt a glimmer of hope. Fine. But we need to be honest with each other. We sat down on the couch, the tension thick between us. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry for what happened with Dan. I never meant for it to go that far. He looked at me, his eyes dark with hurt. But it did. You kissed my father, Nikki. That's not something you just brush aside. I know, and I regret it every moment. But it was a moment of weakness. I felt so lost, and I took it out on you, I confessed, my voice shaking. Why didn't you talk to me? I would have listened, he replied, his voice strained. I was scared, Michael. Scared of what you would think, scared of losing you. I thought I could fix it myself, but I only made things worse, I said, my voice breaking. Michael ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. You should have trusted me, Nikki. Now everything feels different. I don't know if I can forgive you. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Please, just give me a chance. I love you, and I want to make this right. Love isn't supposed to hurt like this, he replied, his voice cold. I felt my heart shatter all over again. I know, and I'm sorry. I don't want to lose you. Then why did you put yourself in that position? He asked, his eyes darkening. I don't know. I just felt so trapped, and I didn't know how to express it, I cried, feeling the weight of my regret. Maybe you should have thought about that before you kissed him, he snapped, his frustration spilling over. I know I messed up. I'm trying to own it, but I can't change the past, I pleaded, feeling tears streaming down my face. He looked away, the hurt evident in his eyes. I need time, Nikki. I can't just pretend everything is okay. As he stood to leave, I felt my heart break into a million pieces. Please, don't give up on us, I begged, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't promise anything right now, he said softly, walking away. As he left, I felt the emptiness envelop me. I knew I had to face the consequences of my actions, but the weight of regret felt crushing. I had ruined the one thing that meant the most to me, and now I was left with nothing but the echoes of what could have been. The days dragged on, and I felt lost in a fog of despair. I threw myself into work, hoping to distract myself from the pain, but it only felt like a band-aid over a gaping wound. Every time I thought of Michael, I felt a crushing guilt settle in my chest. Dan reached out again, offering support, but I felt conflicted. I didn't want to lean on him when I had already crossed a line, and I feared that spending time with him would only complicate things further. One evening, as I sat alone in the dark, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Dan standing there, concern etched on his face. I wanted to check on you, he said softly. I'm fine, I lied, forcing a smile. But the moment he stepped inside, I felt a rush of warmth that made me feel guilty all over again. Are you really? He pressed, his eyes searching mine. No, not really, I admitted, tears threatening to spill over. Let's talk, he said gently, leading me to the couch. As we sat together, I felt a mix of comfort and confusion. I don't know what to do, Dan. I've hurt Michael, and I don't know if he'll ever forgive me, I said, my voice shaky. He might, but you have to give him time. You need to take care of yourself in the meantime, he replied, his tone steady. I just feel so lost, I said, my heart aching. I thought I knew what I wanted, but now I don't know if I'm even capable of figuring it out. Dan reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. You will. Just take it one day at a time. As we sat in silence, I felt a spark of comfort in his presence. But I also felt a weight on my heart, knowing I had to make a choice between two people I cared about. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. I tried to connect with Michael, but he remained distant, lost in his own hurt. I respected his space but felt a deep longing to bridge the gap between us. One afternoon, I found myself at a park, sitting on a bench, lost in thought. Suddenly, I heard a familiar voice. Hey, Michael said, approaching cautiously. Hey, I replied, my heart racing. Can we talk? He asked, his tone softening. Yes, please, I said, feeling a glimmer of hope. We sat down together, the tension palpable but hopeful. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, he began, his voice steady. I'm still hurt, but I want to understand. I'm so sorry, Michael. I never meant for it to go that far. I felt lost and confused, and I took it out on you, I confessed, tears spilling down my cheeks. He nodded, his expression pained. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but it's going to take time for me to process everything. I still love you, but I need to heal. I understand. I'll give you all the time you need, I promised, my heart aching. As we sat together in silence, I felt the weight of my actions settle over me. But this time, I also felt a flicker of hope. I knew that love was complicated, but I was willing to fight for it. As the sun began to set, I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of determination rising within me. I wouldn't give up on Michael, and I wouldn't give up on myself either. No matter how messy things became, I was ready to face the consequences of my choices. Weeks turned into months, and the healing process was anything but linear. Michael and I took small steps toward rebuilding our connection, but the scars of the past remained visible. We had moments of tenderness and laughter, but they were often overshadowed by lingering resentment and mistrust. I continued to meet with Dan, but I made it clear that our relationship had to remain strictly platonic. He respected my boundaries, and our conversations became a source of support as I navigated my emotions. He never pushed me to divulge more than I was comfortable with, and I appreciated that. One evening, Michael and I decided to go out for dinner, hoping to reconnect. As we sat across from each other, the atmosphere felt charged but cautiously optimistic. How have you been? He asked, his tone lighter than it had been in weeks. I've been okay. Work is busy, but it keeps my mind occupied, I replied, taking a sip of my wine. I've been thinking about getting a new project started at work. Something to focus on, he said, a hint of enthusiasm in his voice. That sounds great. You should definitely do it, I encouraged, feeling a sense of pride in his ambition. As we continued talking, I felt a warmth growing between us, reminiscent of our earlier days. It was refreshing to see glimpses of the man I fell in love with, and I clung to those moments like a lifeline. But then, the conversation took a turn. I've been thinking about our future, Michael said, his expression turning serious. I felt my heart race. What do you mean? Maybe we need to figure out what we both want. Do we want to stay together? He asked, his eyes searching mine for answers. I want to stay together, Michael. I love you, and I want to work through this, I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. He nodded, his expression softening. I love you too, but we have to be honest about what we need from each other. It can't just be about fixing the past. We need to talk about the future. I agree. I've been thinking a lot about what I want, and I want to build a future with you, I said, feeling a surge of hope. As we continued to discuss our dreams and fears, I felt a sense of clarity beginning to emerge. I realized that the road to healing would be long, but we were both willing to put in the effort. Over the following weeks, we began to set goals for our relationship. We started going to couples therapy, a decision I initially hesitated about, but it proved to be beneficial. Talking to a professional helped us navigate our emotions in a safe space. Dan continued to be a supportive presence in my life, and I often confided in him about the progress I was making with Michael. He never judged me, always encouraging me to prioritize my happiness. Then, one evening, while we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I glanced at Michael, who was engrossed in the film, and I felt a flicker of warmth in my chest. Michael? I said, breaking the silence. Yeah, he replied, turning to me. I want to thank you for being patient with me. I know it hasn't been easy, I said, my voice sincere. He smiled softly. It hasn't, but I appreciate you saying that. I know you're trying. I am. And I'm committed to making this work, I promised, feeling the weight of my words. As the weeks passed, we began to rebuild our trust. We went on spontaneous outings, explored new hobbies together, and gradually learned to communicate openly about our feelings. I could see the change in Michael. He was slowly opening up again, allowing himself to feel safe with me. One afternoon, I decided to surprise him with a picnic in the park. I packed our favorite snacks and brought along a bottle of wine. When we arrived, I laid out the blanket and poured us each a glass. "This is nice," he said, taking a sip. "I wanted to do something special for us," I replied, feeling a sense of contentment wash over me. As we ate, we reminisced about our early days together, laughing over shared memories. It felt like a turning point, a moment where we were both willing to embrace the possibility of a brighter future. But then, the conversation took a more serious turn. "Nikki, do you think we can ever fully move past what happened?" he asked, his expression thoughtful. "I think we can, but it's going to take time. We both have to be willing to work through the pain together," I replied, my heart racing. "I want that," he said, his voice steady. "But I need to know that you're fully committed to us." "I am. I love you, Michael, and I don't want to lose you," I promised, feeling the weight of my emotions. He nodded, his gaze softening. "Then let's keep moving forward, one step at a time." As we finished our picnic, I felt a renewed sense of hope blossoming between us. The journey to healing wouldn't be easy, but we were committed to facing it together. Weeks turned into months, and while there were still moments of tension, we continued to grow stronger. Michael and I celebrated small victories, like communicating better during difficult conversations or being more open about our feelings. Dan remained a steady friend, but I knew I had to set clear boundaries. I didn't want to complicate my relationship with Michael any further, and I made an effort to keep my interactions with Dan friendly but distant. One evening, I received a text from Dan. "Hey, just checking in. How are things going with Michael?" I hesitated before responding. "Things are improving. We're taking it one day at a time." "Good to hear. Just remember to prioritize yourself too," he replied. I smiled at his message, grateful for his support, but I also felt a sense of determination to focus on my relationship with Michael. The following weekend, Michael surprised me with a spontaneous trip to the beach. As we walked along the shoreline, I felt the warmth of the sun on my skin and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. "This feels nice," I said, looking up at him. "It does. I wanted to remind us of happier times," he said, his expression softening. We spent the day laughing, reminiscing, and enjoying each other's company. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the water, I turned to him. "I love you, Michael." "I love you too, Nikki," he replied, taking my hand. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew we had a long road ahead, but I also knew we were willing to fight for each other. As the weeks turned into months, Michael and I began to settle into a new routine, one that felt more honest and open. We continued to attend couples therapy, where we explored the deeper roots of our struggles. One evening, after a particularly insightful session, we found ourselves lying in bed, the weight of our conversations still fresh in our minds. "Do you think we're really making progress?" Michael asked, his voice low. "I do. It feels different now." "We're not just brushing things under the rug," I replied, turning to face him. He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "It feels good to talk about things instead of hiding them." "I agree. It's hard sometimes, but I think it's worth it," I said, feeling a flicker of hope. As we continued to navigate our new normal, I found comfort in the small moments we shared. Cooking together, going for walks, and simply enjoying each other's company felt like stepping stones toward healing. But the specter of the past still lingered, occasionally rearing its head in the form of doubt or insecurity. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I sensed a shift in the air. "Do you ever think about what happened with Dan?" Michael asked, his expression serious. I took a deep breath, knowing this was a necessary conversation. "I do. It's a part of our story now, and I can't pretend it didn't happen." He looked at me, his gaze searching. "How do you feel about him now?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of my emotions. "I care about him as a friend, but my heart belongs to you." "I love you, Michael. That's what matters." He nodded, his expression softening. "I just want to make sure we're both on the same page." I don't want to feel like I'm competing for your love. You're not competing. I made a mistake, and I'm working hard to make things right with you, I said, feeling a surge of determination. I know, and I appreciate that. I just want us to be honest with each other, he replied, his voice steady. We are. I promise to keep being open with you, I said, reaching for his hand. As we sat together, the air between us felt charged with a mix of vulnerability and understanding. I realized that these conversations, though difficult, were essential to our growth. As the weeks turned into months, we continued to make strides. We celebrated our small victories, whether it was a successful date night or a breakthrough in therapy. Each step forward felt like a reminder of our commitment to one another. However, I remained cautious about Dan. I didn't want to risk Michael's trust by spending too much time with him. We kept our interactions friendly but brief, and I felt a sense of relief when I realized I could maintain a friendship without jeopardizing my relationship. One day, while I was out with Michael, we ran into Dan at a local cafe. My heart raced at the sight of him, but I kept my composure. Hey, Dan. I said, forcing a smile. Hey, Nikki. Good to see you both, he replied, his tone warm. Michael shot me a quick glance, and I could sense the tension in the air. We were just grabbing a coffee, I said, trying to ease the awkwardness. Nice. I hope you're both doing well, Dan said, his gaze flickering between us. We are. Thanks for asking, Michael replied, his voice steady. After a brief chat, we said our goodbyes, and as we walked away, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. That was interesting, I said, glancing at Michael. Yeah, it was. But I trust you, Nikki, he replied, his expression softening. I appreciate that. I'm committed to us, I promised, feeling a sense of gratitude for his understanding. As we continued our journey together, I realized that love was about more than just feelings, it was about trust, honesty, and the willingness to face challenges head-on. Over time, we began to explore new aspects of our relationship. We took up hiking together, discovering beautiful trails and breathtaking views. Each adventure felt like a step forward, a reminder of the bond we were rebuilding. One weekend, while we were out on a hike, we stumbled upon a stunning waterfall. The sight took my breath away, and I turned to Michael, my heart swelling with gratitude. This is amazing. It really is. I'm glad we're doing this together, he said, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. As we stood there, soaking in the beauty of the moment, I felt a renewed sense of hope for our future. I realized that while the past would always be a part of our story, it didn't have to define us. As summer transitioned into fall, the world around us transformed into a canvas of warm colors. Michael and I continued to strengthen our relationship, navigating the complexities of trust and love. One evening, while we were cooking dinner together, I caught a glimpse of the man I fell in love with. He was laughing, his eyes sparkling with mischief as he tossed ingredients into the pan. I can't believe you're making that again, I teased, trying to suppress a grin. What? It's a classic, he replied, feigning indignation. Only if you want to risk burning the kitchen down, I joked, playfully nudging him. As we bantered, I felt a warmth in my chest, a reminder of the bond we were rebuilding. But beneath the surface, I also felt a lingering fear. The past still haunted me, and I couldn't shake the doubt that sometimes crept in. That evening, as we settled down to eat, I decided to voice my concerns. Michael, can I ask you something? Of course. What's on your mind? He replied, his expression attentive. Do you think we'll ever truly move past what happened? I asked, my voice shaky. He paused, considering my words. I think we're making progress, but it's going to take time. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I know, and I'm committed to doing the work, I said, feeling the weight of my emotions. But sometimes I worry that the past will always linger between us. Sometimes it might, but we can't let it define us, he replied, his voice steady. We have to focus on the present and the future. I nodded, feeling a mix of hope and apprehension. You're right. I want to build a future with you, and I don't want to keep looking back. As we continued our dinner, I felt a sense of determination rising within me. I knew that the journey to healing would be ongoing, but I was willing to put in the effort. Over the next few weeks, we made a conscious effort to prioritize our relationship. We scheduled regular date nights, trying new restaurants and exploring the city together. Each outing felt like a step forward, a chance to reconnect and rediscover one another. One night, as we walked home from dinner, I turned to Michael. "I've been thinking about how far we've come," I said, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Me too. It feels good to be back in a good place," he replied, his gaze warm. As we reached our apartment, I felt a surge of happiness. But just as I was about to say something, my phone buzzed with a text from Dan. "Hey, just wanted to check in. How are things?" I hesitated, feeling the familiar pang of guilt. "Everything is going well," I replied, unsure of how to navigate this friendship without jeopardizing my relationship. As the days passed, Dan continued to reach out, and while I appreciated his support, I felt the distance between us growing. I knew I had to establish clearer boundaries, so I made the decision to limit my interactions with him. One evening, I sat down with Michael, determined to have an open conversation. "I need to talk to you about Dan," I said, my heart racing. He looked at me, his expression serious. "Okay, what's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about our friendship, and I want to be transparent with you," I said, feeling the weight of my words. "All right," he said, his gaze steady. "I care about him as a friend, but I don't want to complicate our relationship. I think it's best if I limit my contact with him," I admitted, my heart pounding. Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I appreciate you saying that. It means a lot that you're being honest. I don't want you to feel like you're competing for my affection," I continued. "I love you, and I want to prioritize us." "I want that too," he replied, his voice warm. As we talked, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I knew it wouldn't be easy to navigate this friendship, but I was willing to put in the effort to ensure our relationship remained strong. Over the next few weeks, I limited my interactions with Dan, choosing to focus on my relationship with Michael. We continued to explore new hobbies together, whether it was hiking, cooking, or simply spending time at home. Each moment felt like a step toward healing, and I cherished the bond we were rebuilding. Then, one evening, while we were cuddled up on the couch, Michael turned to me. "Nikki, I've been thinking. How do you feel about us taking a trip together?" My heart raced at the thought. "I'd love that. Where do you want to go?" I was thinking maybe we could visit the mountains for a weekend. "Just the two of us," he suggested, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "That sounds perfect," I said, feeling a surge of happiness. As we made plans for our trip, I felt a sense of anticipation building within me. I knew that spending time together away from our daily routines would allow us to reconnect on a deeper level. The day of our trip arrived, and as we drove through the mountains, I felt a sense of exhilaration. The scenery was breathtaking, and I could feel the weight of the past lifting with each passing mile. Once we arrived at our cabin, I was struck by the beauty of the surroundings. The crisp air and the sound of rustling leaves filled me with a sense of peace. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape, I turned to Michael. "This is incredible. I'm so glad we're here." "Me too. I wanted to create a special moment for us," he said, wrapping his arms around me. As we sat on the porch, watching the sunset, I felt a renewed sense of hope blossoming between us. I realized that while the past would always be a part of our story, it didn't have to define our future. That night, as we cuddled under the stars, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. I knew that love was about more than just feelings, it was about the commitment to grow together. As we settled into our cabin, I felt a sense of tranquility wash over me. The rustling leaves and distant sounds of nature enveloped us, creating a perfect backdrop for healing and reconnecting. Over the next few days, we explored the mountains together. Hiking through the trails, sharing laughter, and simply enjoying each other's company felt like a dream come true. Each moment reminded me of why I fell in love with Michael in the first place. One afternoon, we found ourselves at a beautiful viewpoint overlooking the valley. The scenery was breathtaking, and I couldn't help but take a deep breath, feeling grateful for the moment. "Isn't it incredible?" I said, looking at Michael. "It really is. I love being here with you, he replied, his gaze warm. As we stood there, I felt a surge of emotion rising within me. I love you, Michael, I said, turning to face him. I love you too, Nikki, he said, taking my hands in his. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace settle between us, a reminder that we were willing to face the challenges ahead. That night, as we sat by the fireplace, I decided to bring up something that had been weighing on my mind. Michael, I wanted to talk about the future, I began, my voice steady. Okay, what do you want to discuss? He replied, his expression attentive. I've been thinking about what we want moving forward. I want us to build a life together, I confessed, my heart racing. He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. I want that too. But I think we need to take our time and keep communicating. I agree. I don't want to rush anything, but I also want to make sure we're on the same page, I said, feeling a sense of clarity. As we continued to talk, I felt a sense of hope blooming within me. I realized that while the journey to healing wasn't linear, our commitment to each other was unwavering. As the days turned into nights, we continued to bond over shared experiences. We cooked together, laughed over silly stories, and spent evenings by the fire, savoring the warmth of our connection. However, the shadow of the past still lingered, reminding me that healing takes time. I remained vigilant about my friendship with Dan, ensuring that I didn't cross any boundaries that could jeopardize my relationship with Michael. Then, one evening, while we were cuddled up by the fire, Michael turned to me. I've been thinking about our conversations regarding the future, he said, his expression serious. Okay, what's on your mind? I asked, feeling my heart race. I think it might be time for us to consider moving in together, he said, his gaze steady. My heart soared at the suggestion. Really? You're serious? I am. I think it would be a step towards solidifying our commitment, he replied, his tone earnest. I smiled, feeling a surge of happiness. I think it's a great idea. I want us to take that step together. As we talked about the logistics of moving in together, I felt a sense of excitement bubbling within me. I knew this was a significant step, and I was ready for it. Over the next few weeks, we began to explore potential places to live. Each outing felt like an adventure, a chance to envision our future together. As we walked through various neighborhoods, I could feel the excitement building. I wanted to create a space that reflected both of us, a place filled with love, laughter, and memories. One afternoon, as we toured an apartment, I turned to Michael. This feels like home, I said, my heart racing. I feel it too. Let's make this ours, he replied, his gaze warm. In that moment, I knew we were on the right path. The journey to healing hadn't been easy, but our commitment to each other was strong. As we settled into our new apartment, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The walls echoed with our laughter, and I cherished the moments we shared. We decorated our space with mementos from our adventures and filled it with love. But just as I thought we were in the clear, a message from Dan popped up on my phone. Hey, just checking in. How are things going with you too? I felt a pang of guilt wash over me. I wanted to respond, but I knew I had to prioritize my relationship. I decided to keep my response brief. Things are great. Hope you're doing well. As the days passed, I found myself torn between two worlds. I appreciated Dan's friendship, but I also knew I had to focus on my relationship with Michael. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I brought up my feelings. Michael, can we talk about Dan again? He looked at me, his expression serious. Of course. What's on your mind? I care about him as a friend, but I want to make sure I'm not jeopardizing what we have. I want to set clear boundaries, I said, my heart racing. Michael nodded, his gaze steady. I appreciate you saying that. It shows you're committed to us. I want to prioritize our relationship, I continued, feeling a sense of determination. As we talked, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew I had to set boundaries with Dan to protect what we were building together. Over the next few weeks, I continued to limit my interactions with Dan, focusing on my relationship with Michael. We celebrated our small victories, whether it was cooking a new recipe together or simply enjoying each other's company. Then, one day, Michael surprised me with a spontaneous weekend getaway. "Pack your bags. We're heading to the coast," he said, excitement shining in his eyes. I could hardly contain my joy. "Really? That sounds amazing." As we drove toward the coast, I felt a sense of exhilaration wash over me. The ocean stretched out before us, its waves crashing against the shore. When we arrived at our destination, we spent the day exploring the beach, collecting seashells, and savoring the salty air. Each moment felt like a celebration of our love, a reminder of how far we'd come. That evening, as we watched the sunset, I turned to Michael. "I can't believe how lucky I am to have you in my life," I said, my heart full. "I feel the same way," he replied, wrapping his arms around me. As we sat together, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink, I felt a renewed sense of hope for our future. I knew we still had challenges ahead, but our commitment to one another was unwavering. As summer turned into fall, Michael and I continued to thrive in our new apartment. Our love felt like a warm blanket, wrapping us in comfort and security. We found joy in the everyday moments, whether it was cooking together, binge-watching our favorite shows, or simply enjoying quiet evenings at home. However, I couldn't shake the lingering presence of my friendship with Dan. Despite my efforts to set boundaries, he continued to reach out, and I often found myself torn between my feelings of guilt and loyalty. One evening, as we prepared dinner together, I felt the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. "Michael, can we talk about Dan?" I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Sure. What's on your mind?" he replied, his tone open and inviting. "I know I've been limiting my contact with him, but I just feel guilty. He's been a good friend to me," I confessed, my voice shaky. Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand that, but I want you to remember that our relationship comes first. It's okay to have friends, but you need to prioritize us." "I know. I don't want you to feel like you're competing for my affection," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "I appreciate you saying that. It means a lot to me," he replied, his gaze warm. As we finished preparing dinner, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I knew I had to be honest about my feelings, and I was grateful for Michael's understanding. Over the next few weeks, I made a conscious effort to limit my interactions with Dan. I still cared about him, but I was committed to prioritizing my relationship with Michael. One day, while I was out running errands, I ran into Dan at a local coffee shop. My heart raced at the sight of him, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. "Hey, Nikki. It's great to see you," he said, his smile warm. "Hey, Dan. You too," I replied, forcing a smile. As we chatted, I could sense the tension in the air. I knew I had to be careful about my words and actions. "How have you been?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "I've been good. Just busy with work." "How are things with you?" he replied, his gaze searching. "They're going well. Michael and I are doing great," I said, feeling a sense of pride. "That's good to hear." "I'm glad you're happy," Dan replied, his tone sincere. As we continued to chat, I felt a pang of guilt wash over me. I cared about Dan, but I also knew I had to prioritize my relationship with Michael. After our conversation, I decided to text Michael. "Ran into Dan today. He seemed good. Just wanted to let you know." I felt a surge of anxiety as I hit send, hoping he wouldn't read too much into it. Moments later, my phone buzzed with a response. "Thanks for telling me. I appreciate your honesty." That evening, as we settled down to watch a movie, I decided to bring up the encounter. "Michael, I ran into Dan today," I said, gauging his reaction. He looked at me, his expression neutral. "Okay. How did it go?" "It was good. We talked for a bit, but I just wanted to let you know," I said, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. "Thanks for being upfront about it. I trust you, and that means a lot to me," he replied, his tone sincere. As we watched the movie, I felt a sense of gratitude for Michael's understanding. I knew that our commitment to open communication was essential to our relationship. As the weeks went on, we continued to build a life together. We explored new hobbies, celebrated milestones, and cherished the moments we shared. Each day felt like a new opportunity to strengthen our bond. However, the specter of the past still loomed, and I remained vigilant about my friendship with Dan. I knew I had to prioritize my relationship with Michael, and I was determined to navigate this delicate balance. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I turned to Michael. "I want to talk about our future again," I said, my heart racing. "Okay, what do you want to discuss?" he asked, his expression open. "I've been thinking about how we can solidify our commitment." "Maybe we should consider getting engaged," I said, feeling a surge of hope. Michael's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? Are you serious?" "I am. I love you, and I want to build a future together," I said, feeling my heart race. "I love you too, Nikki. I've thought about it, but I wanted to make sure we were ready," he replied, his gaze steady. As we continued to talk about our future, I felt a sense of excitement bubbling within me. I knew we still had challenges ahead, but our commitment to each other was stronger than ever. As autumn rolled in, the air grew crisp, and the leaves transformed into a vibrant tapestry of colors. Michael and I continued to thrive in our relationship, savoring the simple joys of life together. However, the weight of our past still lingered, reminding me of the journey we had undertaken. I knew I had to remain vigilant about my friendship with Dan, but the guilt of wanting to maintain that connection continued to gnaw at me. One evening, as we were preparing dinner together, I decided to address the situation head-on. "Michael, can we talk about Dan again?" He looked up from chopping vegetables, his expression attentive. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I want to make sure we're both on the same page regarding my friendship with him," I said, feeling a mix of determination and anxiety. "I appreciate you bringing it up. I trust you, but I want to make sure you're being honest with yourself," he replied, his tone steady. "I care about Dan as a friend, but I also want to make sure I'm prioritizing us," I said, my voice steady. "I think that's important. Just remember, it's okay to have boundaries," he replied, his gaze warm. As we finished preparing dinner, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I knew that maintaining open communication was vital for our relationship. Over the next few weeks, I continued to limit my interactions with Dan, focusing on building my life with Michael. We celebrated our small victories, whether it was trying a new recipe or going for long walks together. However, one evening, as we sat on the couch, I received another message from Dan. "Hey, just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" I felt a familiar pang of guilt wash over me. I wanted to respond, but I also knew I had to prioritize my relationship. I decided to keep my response brief. "Things are good. Hope you're doing well." As the days passed, I found myself torn between two worlds. I appreciated Dan's friendship, but I also knew I had to prioritize my relationship with Michael. One afternoon, while we were out running errands, I turned to Michael. "I've been thinking about our future again," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Okay, what do you want to discuss?" he asked, his expression open. "I think it might be time for us to consider getting engaged," I said, feeling my heart race. Michael's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? Are you serious?" "I am. I love you, and I want to build a life together," I said, my heart soaring. "I love you too, Nikki. I've thought about it, but I wanted to make sure we were ready," he replied, his gaze warm. As we continued to talk about our future, I felt a sense of excitement bubbling within me. I knew that while the past would always be a part of our story, it didn't have to define our future. Over the next few weeks, we continued to explore the idea of engagement, discussing our hopes and dreams for the future. Each conversation felt like a step forward, a reminder of the love we shared. Then, one weekend, as we strolled through a local park, Michael turned to me. "I want to take you somewhere special," he said, his expression mysterious. "Where are we going?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "You'll see," he replied, his smile infectious. As we walked, I felt a sense of anticipation building within me. When we arrived at a beautiful garden, I was in awe of the vibrant colors and fragrant flowers. "This is beautiful," I said, taking in the surroundings. I thought you'd like it, he said, his gaze warm. As we walked through the garden, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The beauty of the moment enveloped us, and I realized that we were on the brink of something new. Then, as we reached a secluded spot, Michael turned to me, his expression serious. "Nikki, there's something I want to ask you," he said, his voice steady. My heart raced as he knelt down, pulling out a small box. "Will you marry me?" I gasped, my heart soaring. "Yes. Yes, I will." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt a wave of joy wash over me. In that moment, I knew we had truly overcome the challenges of our past, and I was ready to embrace our future together. As the days turned into weeks, the excitement of our engagement filled the air. Michael and I spent our evenings planning for the future, discussing everything from wedding details to our dreams of building a life together. However, amidst the joy, I couldn't shake the lingering feelings associated with my friendship with Dan. I knew I had to set clearer boundaries, so I decided to reach out to him one last time. One afternoon, I texted Dan, "Hey, can we talk? I want to catch up." I felt a mix of anxiety and determination as I hit send, knowing that this conversation would be crucial for my relationship with Michael. Later that day, we met at a local cafe. As I sat across from Dan, I could sense the tension in the air. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, my voice steady. "Of course." "What's on your mind?" he replied, his expression curious. "I wanted to talk about our friendship," I said, taking a deep breath. "Michael and I recently got engaged, and I want to make sure that I'm prioritizing our relationship." Dan's expression shifted slightly, and I could see the realization dawn on him. "Congratulations." "I'm happy for you, really," he said, his tone sincere. "Thank you. I appreciate that. But I also want to be honest. I think it's best if we limit our contact moving forward," I said, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. "I understand. I just want you to know that I'll always care about you," he replied, his gaze steady. "I care about you too, but my priority needs to be with Michael," I said, my voice firm. As we finished our conversation, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew that prioritizing my relationship with Michael was the right decision. In the weeks that followed, Michael and I dove headfirst into wedding planning. We chose a date, booked a venue, and even began creating a guest list. Each decision felt like a step toward our shared future, a reminder of the love we had built together. However, one evening, while we were discussing our plans, I received another text from Dan. "Hey, just checking in. How are you and Michael doing?" I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. I had set boundaries for a reason, and his message felt like a step backward. I decided to keep my response brief. "We're good. Busy with wedding planning. Hope you're doing well." As the weeks passed, the stress of wedding planning began to weigh on me. I wanted everything to be perfect, but I also felt the pressure of managing my emotions and maintaining boundaries with Dan. One evening, as I sat on the couch with Michael, I decided to voice my feelings. "I've been feeling a bit overwhelmed with everything," I admitted. Michael turned to me, concern etched on his face. "What's going on? Talk to me. I love planning our wedding, but I'm also feeling the weight of my friendship with Dan. I want to make sure I'm being fair to you," I said, my voice shaky. "I appreciate you saying that. Just remember, we're in this together. You don't have to carry the weight alone," he replied, wrapping his arms around me. As we talked, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I knew that our commitment to open communication was essential for navigating these challenges. As the wedding day approached, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. I wanted everything to be perfect, but I also knew I had to remain true to myself and my relationship with Michael. Then, just days before the wedding, I received a call from Dan. "Hey, Nikki. I just wanted to wish you well for the big day," he said, his tone genuine. "Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it," I replied, my heart heavy. "I hope you're happy. Just know that I'll always be here if you need to talk," he said, his voice sincere. "Thank you. That means a lot," I said, feeling a mix of emotions. After our conversation, I felt a sense of closure. I knew that moving forward meant embracing my future with Michael and letting go of the past. On the day of our wedding, the sun shone brightly, and the air was filled with love and laughter. Surrounded by friends and family, I felt a wave of happiness wash over me. As I walked down the aisle, Michael's gaze met mine, and I felt a rush of emotion. In that moment, I knew that we had truly overcome the challenges of our past. "I do," I said, my voice steady as we exchanged vows. As we sealed our promises with a kiss, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I was ready to embrace our future together, hand in hand with the love of my life. As the seasons changed, Michael and I settled into married life. Our days were filled with laughter, love, and a newfound sense of security. We faced challenges together, but each obstacle only strengthened our bond. One afternoon, as we sat on the couch reminiscing about our wedding day, I felt a surge of gratitude. "I can't believe how far we've come," I said, smiling at Michael. "I know. It's been a journey, but I wouldn't trade it for anything," he replied, wrapping his arm around me. As we talked, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that while our journey had been filled with ups and downs, our commitment to each other would guide us through. In that moment, I realized that love isn't just about the grand gestures, it's about the everyday moments that make life beautiful. And as we continued to build our life together, I knew that we were just getting started.